All right, now as you know, we have to do, as a requirement for 175, you have to do a research paper. And only we're not going to call it a research paper, we're going to call it a multi-source argumentative research essay. Big name, but it's not that different than what you did as juniors. The main difference is, for that paper, I've graded a lot of those junior research papers, and they're not good. I think it's mainly because you're writing about a topic you have no interest in, and you're just compiling facts, and it's about 95% quotes and information that's all been cut and pasted together, and we're not going to do that for this. Keywords here, multi-source, you're going to need minimum 5 scholarly sources. And I'll explain what we mean by scholarly sources in just a minute. But you need minimum of 5. It's only going to be 5 to 7 pages long, double spaced. So it's not anything as extensive as the paper you've written in the past. Some of those I saw were like 25 pages. This is much shorter, so it's going to be more focused also. Okay, notice it says argumentative. Your paper has to be arguing a point. It's not just an expository paper where you're just giving information. It has to argue a specific point. And your topic is the author of your choice. So I've listed, these are some of the authors we've studied this year. And you may not have read every one of them. Remember, each class is doing different books, so you may not have read all of these. We've all read Flannery O'Connor. We've all read Death of a Salesman. You guys have read 1984. We all read Hamlet, Faulkner, Barn Burning, beginning of the year, Lord of the Flies, Fahrenheit 451. You guys have not read these two yet, or that one. We just started, Joseph Conrad. You can pick any author you want to use as the subject of your paper. But it has to be, I would strongly suggest it's somebody we've read this year or maybe last year in your, I know you've read a lot of literature in your junior class. It has to be a well-known, serious author. We're not doing any Harry Potter or anything like that. Right? So you're going to argue something about that particular author, and you're going to focus on one particular work by that author. There's no way you could cover everything that Shakespeare has said. I mean, there are volumes and volumes and volumes written about Shakespeare. So you're going to pick a specific work, and you're going to try to narrow it down to one specific idea about that work. For example, if you're writing about Hamlet, there are hundreds of thousands of pieces of writing about Hamlet. And there's no way you could encompass it all in 5 to 7 pages. So you're going to have to pick out one specific idea you're going to focus upon. Okay? And that's probably the hardest part of the paper, because there's so much for most of these authors. To try to find one specific aspect is probably going to be your biggest task. So you're going to pick an author, and you're going to pick the work you want to focus on. Then you have to figure out what is the point you're going to argue. Notice it says a research essay. I do not want this to read like your junior research papers, where it was just a compilation of just random facts that hardly made sense. This is going to be an essay. What is your research going to do for your essay?
Support.
It's good. It's going to support what you're saying. You're arguing something about this author in this specific work, and the research is just going to support that. Your paper, unlike your junior research paper, is not going to be 99% facts put together. The facts you include in this are going to be just there to support what you're already saying. Does that make sense? Okay. It should read more like you and less like a bunch of facts. Okay. The key is to come up with a good thesis. We've worked on thesis statements a lot. Look at A. John Steinbeck is a great author. I get sophomores writing that kind of thesis all the time. What's wrong with that?
No tension.
There's no tension, just a statement.
Oh, no,
What else is wrong with it?
It doesn't describe what you're actually going to talk about in the paper, like what specific ideas you're going to talk about.
Very good. It's very vague, very general, and you would assume if you saw that as your thesis, the whole paper is just going to keep telling me he's a great author. Is that something that needs to be argued or proven? No. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature. There's no one who's going to stand up and say, I disagree with that. He was not a great author. He was. It's generally accepted. That is common knowledge. We don't want a thesis that already tells the reader something they previously know. So it should be something that's challenging and new. Something that's going to challenge the reader's preconceived ideas about that author and that specific work. If you look at your thesis and without doing any research, you can look at it and say, I knew that already. It's not a good thesis. It should be pointing out something that the reader is going to say, wow, that's a new idea I never thought of. Look at our second one. It's better. John Steinbeck's novel Of Mice and Men is about the American dream. Okay, that's a little bit more focused. Now we know we're not going to just talk about the book and he's a great author. We're going to focus on an analogy between the novel and the concept of the American dream. What's still lacking? Tension. There's no tension there. And it's still a little bit vague. What about the American dream? The American dream is a pretty big concept. Letter C. Although John Steinbeck's novel Of Mice and Men can be read as a simple story of friendship and loneliness, okay, there's our tension, subordinate clause, comma, it is an allegory attacking the corruption and failure of the American dream. Okay, that would be a good thesis. It's bringing up something that if you just read the book, like my sophomores read the book, I've never had a sophomore raise his hand and say, you know what, this is about the failure and corruption of the American dream. All they see it as at first is a story about friendship and loneliness. So your tension comes from pointing out it's an allegory that can be read on a deeper level, and this is what we're going to focus on, corruption and failure of the American dream in the United States. This is the type of thesis you want. That make sense? Good. Okay. For the introduction, we're going to begin with a hook, like we always do. For the hook for this paper, let's use a direct quote. Now you can use a direct quote from the author you're writing about. So you could use a direct quote from John Steinbeck, for example, about his talking about literature, just in general. Or you could use a direct quote, maybe not from Steinbeck, but about the American dream by somebody totally unrelated to John Steinbeck. Or you could find a quote from John Steinbeck about the American dream. Any way you want to work it, but you're going to begin with a direct quote acting as your hook. Now when you use a direct quote, what do you do with that quote to make sure it's not dangling? You embed the quote in a sentence. So if you were using a quote from John Steinbeck, you would say, the great American author John Steinbeck once said in his book, The Red Pony, comma, and then give your quote and cite it correctly. Okay? After you give your quote as the hook, what do you need to do? Explain the hook. Discuss the quote. So whatever you use as a quote, it requires some explanation. If your quote is so simplistic that it doesn't require any explanation at all, it's probably not a really effective hook. The hook should make them think and wonder. So you're going to explain the quote. Now, in the rest of the introduction, what I would do is identify, say you're doing John Steinbeck, I would identify first what novel you're referring to. So in this case, it would be Of Mice and Men. And then you're assuming that the reader of your paper has not read it. So you need to include a what? A summary. A brief summary of the important ideas in the book. Probably plot, possibly theme, in the introduction. Then you're going to end up with your thesis at the end of the introduction. So you're going to transition from plot, summary, into your thesis. Okay? Now that's nothing new, we've done this before. You should all feel pretty comfortable with that. Now, for the body of the paper, you need, like I said, 5 minimum scholarly sources. Keyword is scholarly. The purpose of this paper for 175 is not just to learn about an author in greater detail. The purpose is to learn how to differentiate between weak sources and scholarly sources. So what are we not going to use? Wikipedia. Wikipedia will not work. Okay, the kind of sources we're going to use are all going to come from academic journals, written by, normally, published by universities, often professors from universities doing their own research. One way you can begin your search, go to our library website. Go online, just says Post Falls School District 273. And it's that orange website, I think, comes up as a default setting on a lot of our computers.
Yeah.
Okay. Then go to Lilly, meaning libraries in Idaho linked, I think is the acronym. Go to Lilly. From there, click on to Academic Search Premier. Click on that, and that will take you to EBSCO. And then you just type in John Steinbeck, Of Mice and Men, sources. And these sources will all be at academic level. A lot of them aren't very long because they're very focused. They pinpoint one specific idea. You're going to use a minimum of 5 in writing your paper just to support your ideas. I do not want your paper to be just one source after another. Okay? The one question I have not heard, I know everybody's thinking, when is it due? Your rough draft. By rough draft, I mean it has to be the correct length, 5 to 7 pages. That doesn't mean 4 in a sentence. 5 to 7 pages, works cited with at minimum 5 scholarly sources, everything in MLA format, proper thesis, everything you need must be in your rough draft Friday the 13th. What an appropriate day. May 13th, Friday the 13th. And just like we've done in assignments on the past, I will collect your rough draft, and it's an all or nothing. Either you have it and you get the points, or you don't have it and you don't get any points. Then we'll do a little peer editing on the rough draft, and then you'll finish it up and submit it to me. Does that make sense? This actually is not a bad assignment. I know some of you dread research, but almost every year people say, I kind of enjoyed it because I found out something about an author I was interested in, but I didn't really know that well. And by the time you're done writing this, you'll have a pretty good idea about that author. So try to pick someone you enjoyed, someone you were interested in. It makes the writing of the paper a lot easier. Okay? All right, that's it.